the purpose of this whole course has been to give you an overview of the power market system, the theory, and how the market is functioning in practice. It has also been to give you an idea of how legislation is performed and how legislation set up the framework for the power market. Bent Ole has, in his presentations, talked about how legislation set up the framework for the power market and how politicians, they can in fact affect the power market by the choices they make. He has also shown that national objectives translated to legislation can in fact reduce CO2 emissions locally, but it can affect the global market in a way that you will not have any reduction at all. Instead, you can in fact have a more expensive solution. He has also talked about the CO2 quota market in the EU and how important it is that you do the legislation on an international level. Ulrik and I have talked about the power market. Ulrik has focused on the theory behind the power market, and I have shown how this theory can work in practice. I applied the power market simulator in order to do that. In this video, I will combine the market part and the legislation part and show you how the market, in fact, can ensure that political targets can be achieved. I will also show how national goals and targets can affect the international power market in a way that it makes everything more expensive on a global scale.
The learning objectives there are: you must know how the legislation affects the electricity market. You must know how special national goals and legislation regarding the electricity system may be unsuitable seen from an overall picture. It is the leakage problem we're talking about here. You must gain an insight into how the electricity market and the market for CO2 quotas can ensure that climate targets are met. And you must become familiar with a method that reliably reduces CO2 emissions. The content of this video is that I will show you what happens when a country makes special legislation regarding electricity taxes or subsidies for electricity production units. There are also many that believe that if you want to reduce CO2 emissions in a country, you need to build more photovoltaic units or wind turbines. I will look at this problem and I will answer the question if the CO2 emissions in fact is reduced when a country decides to expand with additional wind power, or what happens. There is also a lot of countries that now want to build power-to-X plants. Should these countries themselves ensure that there will be built more renewable plants in order to fulfill the extra demand created by the power-to-X plants, or will the international market handle it? And finally, can CO2 emission be reduced in electricity and heat production? And how can that in fact be done? In this video, we will use the full version of the power market simulator. The first thing we'll look at is what happens when a country decides to put some special taxes on, for instance, coal-fired units. How will this affect the total international market? In order to do so, we will look here at the Nordic countries and Germany and Luxembourg. This is our market area here. And we do a calculation here without special taxes on coal-fired units. As a result here, we can see that we have set the same prices in Germany and in Denmark and Sweden and Norway. It's only in Finland where there are a special price. So there is only a bottleneck here between Sweden and Finland. All the other areas, they are without bottlenecks. If we click here on Germany, we can see the supply curve for Germany, and we can see here that the marginal unit here is this one here. This is the production in Germany. This here is the marginal unit in Greifswald. And it is, in fact, this unit that sets the price in the Nordic system, with the exception of Finland. If we look here at the DK1 here, you can see here that the coal-fired units here in DK1, 4 coal-fired units, they are all running at their maximum capacity. If we look here at the show results here, you can see that this total CO2 emissions in DK1 is 1,121. We will now increase the cost here of these units here. We will put a special Danish tax on coal-fired units and see what will happen. The idea behind this extra tax here is that we want to reduce the CO2 emissions in DK1. Before we do that, here we will just find the total result here for the whole area. You can see here this is the total CO2 emission in the market area we're focusing on. It's 17,687. You can see here the total cost of production and consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and transmission surplus and total surplus. We will remember these figures here. But now we will increase the cost of coal-fired units here in DK1. The way we do that is that we take this maintenance extra, we choose the area DK1 here, and then we will find all the units, the coal-fired units here in DK1. For instance, Esbjergværket here, this one here, and then we will increase the cost by implementing a special Danish tax on coal-fired units. We will do that also for the 3 other coal-fired units in DK1, and then we will look at the result. I've now increased the production cost of the coal-fired unit in DK1, and now I'll make a new calculation of market prices. What you can see here is that the prices in Sweden and Norway and Germany and Denmark has increased. The price here in Finland is the same as before, because Finland is not, there's a bottleneck from Sweden to Finland, so Finland will have their own price. If we look here in DK1 here, you can see now that this here is the production in DK1. This is the consumption in DK1, and you can see here that coal-fired units, they are now too expensive to be running in the system. If we look at the result here, you can see that we really we have obtained what we wanted. We have reduced the CO2 emissions dramatically. If we look here at Germany, we focus here, you can see now that this unit here, Greifswald, is running at its full load. This unit here is also running at full load, and this unit here is running on part load. And this unit here is setting the marginal price in the system. Now we will look at the total result here for the whole area. And we can see here, this is the total result. We can see that the CO2 emissions has in fact increased, because now it is 17,847 tons. And you can also see that the production costs, they have increased. Let us now compare these results here with the results before we increased the cost of the coal-fired unit in DK1. Here you can see the results before the special Danish taxes, and here you can see the results after the special Danish taxes. And you can see that the CO2 emissions in the whole system has increased with 160 tons. And this is due to the fact that more inefficient, the German power plants has taken over production from the Danish power plants. We cannot accept this increase in CO2 emissions because we have a CO2 quota, and so we have to increase the cost of the CO2 quota in order to have the same CO2 emissions after we have included these special Danish taxes. Let us see how that looks in the next slide. In the power market simulator, we increase CO2 quota prices, and a little extra CO2 quota price here. We do a calculation. We see here how much has CO2 emission been reduced. If it is not enough reduction, we increase again the CO2 quota price, and we'll do that until we have the same CO2 emissions as we had before we started putting special Danish taxes on coal-fired units. What you can see here is that when we have the same CO2 emissions here, the prices in the areas, also in Finland, has increased considerably. And this is due to the fact that the CO2 quota price has increased, and this increase in CO2 quota price will also make all the area prices increasing. But let us now compare the total result here before and after we have put these special Danish taxes on CO2 units. Here we compare the results in the situation without special Danish coal taxes and the situation where we have special Danish coal taxes. As you can see here, the total cost here, they have increased, and that is due to the fact that CO2 quota prices has increased, and that we have replaced more efficient Danish coal-fired units with German units. The producer surplus has increased considerably, and that is due to the fact that the CO2 quota price will increase the area prices in all the areas. So the producers, they will earn much more money. The consumers must pay for this. there are higher prices, so the consumer surplus will be reduced. The transmission surplus will also increase in this situation. And the total surplus will decrease, and the amount this surplus will decrease is equal to the extra production costs here. When you look on the transmission surplus for between Finland and Sweden, this is the value of the area differences in area prices after we have included this special Danish taxes, and this is before. And when we multiply this difference with the capacity, we will get a value for the difference before and after having these special Danish taxes on coal-fired units. So you can see here that when we are putting special Danish taxes on coal-fired units, the CO2 emissions in Denmark will reduce, but the CO2 emissions globally will be at the same level. The producers, they will earn much more money because CO2 quota prices will increase, and the consumers must pay for these higher taxes. We will now look at another case where a nation decides to build much more wind power in order to reduce their CO2 emissions. How will such decision affect the international power markets? In order to analyze this case, we will also use the power market simulator. So I will open the power market simulator. We will use the same market area as in the first case here. It's Germany and the Nordic countries. And we will also use the same prices there, except for the CO2 price, which has been increased to around 40 euros per ton. So now let us make a calculation here and find the prices in the different price areas. As you can see here, the prices in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, they have the same prices. There are no bottlenecks between these price areas. There is a bottleneck between Sweden and Finland, so Finland will have their own price. We also look here at the total result here. We can see the CO2 emissions here in this specific hour. We can see the total production cost, the producer surplus, consumer surplus, transmission surplus, and the total surplus. We will build the extra wind power in this price area DK1. So let us look here how its supply curve is in DK1. You can see here we have these coal-fired units here, and the marginal unit operating here is a biomass plant, this biomass plant. You can also see that this is the total production, this is the demand. Let us see here. You can see the consumption, production, and you can see the CO2 emissions in DK1, 1,121. We'll remember this figure here. Now we decide to build 2,000 megawatt of wind power in this area. The way we do here this is that we say we will build new wind. We will we decide that it is in DK1. We choose the fuel here to be wind, and we say it should be offshore wind. We say that it should be commissioned in the year 2000, and we say that the total capacity is 2,000 megawatt, and we said the color should be red. So when we look here now in DK1, you can see that we have included this offshore wind park. The capacity is 700 megawatt, but this is due to the fact that we only have availability for wind of 35%. So if you take 35% of 2,000, you will have this 700 megawatt wind. Let us now do a new calculation here. And we can see that the prices in different price areas, they are in fact unchanged. If we look at the total result here, we can see that the CO2 emissions, they have reduced a little here. And what will then happen? Now we have more wind here. We have a quota for this total system, but CO2 emissions, they have reduced. So there will be some players that will have an excess of CO2 quotas, and they want to sell these quotas to units that emit CO2 emissions, so that the CO2 quota price here will in fact reduce. So what we do now is that we reduce the CO2 emissions here, and then we do a new quick calculation here. And we will do that until we have the same CO2 emissions as we had before we built the wind turbines in DK1. So let's go back to the slides and continue showing how this will affect the total market system. CO2 quota market will ensure that the targets set up by the politicians will be reached. If you build wind turbines, you will not reduce the CO2 emissions, but instead you will reduce the price of CO2 quotas, because it will be easier for the system to reach the target set up by the politicians. You can see here that we have nearly the same CO2 emissions here, but the price here has been reduced. So before we built the wind turbines, the CO2 price was 40. Now it is reduced to 37 euros per ton. And you can see here that before we had these prices in our market area, and after we have a lower price because CO2 quota prices have been reduced. Let us now look at the accounting for the overall system. Here you can see the CO2 emissions, they are nearly the same, but we can see how total production cost, they have in fact reduced here. Producer surplus has also reduced here. Consumer surplus has increased here, and transmission surplus has also increased, and total surplus here has also increased. And here you can see the values of these increases and decreases. The reason why the production cost, they will reduce, is that we have some wind turbines that will replace coal-fired units, and the wind turbines, they have a lower variable marginal cost than coal-fired units. The producer surplus will be reduced because we have lower market prices. The consumer surplus is increased due to these lower market prices, and the transmission surplus here is the transmission between Sweden and Finland, and it is increased because we have without wind turbines, we have a lower difference between prices in Finland and Sweden. The total surplus here is increased But in this increase here, we have not considered the cost of building these wind turbines. Let us now look at the situation in DK1 where we built the turbines. You can see here that we have these coal-fired units, they are running here, and we have a biomass unit here that is also running, and we are in fact importing a small amount of power to DK1. The CO2 emissions here is 1,121, and it is due to this here that the Danish government, they say we want to reduce CO2 emissions by building wind turbines. Let's look at if this will happen in the real world. This here is a picture of what it looks like in DK1 after we have built the turbines. Here you can see the extra wind we have built. You can see here that this is the production here. We are in fact running exactly the same units in DK1. So instead of importing a small amount of power, we are now exporting a large amount of power. Production here has increased with 700 megawatts, equal to the production here on the wind turbines. You can see here that the CO2 emissions in DK1 is exactly the same because we are running the same fossil fuel plants in the area because they are competitive on the international market. We will now look at the accounting for DK1 here. This is the situation without wind. This is the situation with wind, extra wind in DK1. You can see that the CO2 emissions is the same here. The total production cost, they have in fact increased, even if the CO2 quota price has reduced, but it also costs money to have extra wind power running. So this is the reason why we have this increase in production cost. You can see here that the producer surplus has increased, and this is of course due to the fact that we have a lot of wind power that will produce at a very low marginal cost, and they will get the price in area DK1. The consumer surplus has increased because we have lower prices. Transmission surplus there's no transmission surplus because we have no bottlenecks out of DK1. The total surplus here has increased because we have this wind power producing in DK1. The extra wind power here will give the DK1 society a profit of 52,070 euros per hour. And of course, if this amount here is enough to pay for the extra wind power, it is a good idea to invest in these wind turbines. But if it is not enough to ensure that it is a good investment, one should not make this investment. Based on this case here, we can conclude that you cannot reduce CO2 emissions in an area where we have a quota system by building wind turbines and solar cells. If you want to build wind turbines and solar cells, it must be based on economical considerations. As part of the green transition, we need to have much more renewable energy integrated into the transportation sector. This will, of course, increase the electricity demand because we will have electrical cars, and we will also have plants that will convert power to hydrogen, which could then also produce synthetic fuels that could be used in the transport sector. In this last case here, I will show how the CO2 quota market and the electricity market will ensure that the CO2 targets can be met even if we have a very high increase in electricity demand. For the sake of clarity, I will only examine 1 hour, because the market mechanisms are the same in all hours. So it doesn't matter even if I only examine 1 hour. I will also assume that we have a closed system here, and this system here is symbolizing EU, but it's a much smaller system, where we have a total emission of 580 tons of CO2. In this system we are analyzing, we have wind turbines, we have solar cells, we have biomass plants, coal-fired, gas-fired and oil-fired units. The electricity consumption in this area is 6,000 megawatt per hour without having any Power-to-X plants. This here is a picture of the power market before we have this extra 600 megawatt of Power-to-X units. We have here the supply curve here, and we have a demand here, and the demand is this 6,000 megawatts. We have calculated this applying the power market simulator, and the CO2 emissions here in this system here is 580 ton in this specific hour we are analyzing. And we say here we have, for the whole system here, we have a CO2 target, a CO2 quota of this 580 ton. We have wind turbines here, we have the coal-fired units here, and we have biomass units here, and we have a natural gas unit here. And this unit here is the marginal unit in the system, setting the marginal price of this 44.25 euros here per megawatt hour. We now built a Power-to-X unit here with a capacity of 600 megawatt. This will increase the demand. So now the demand here is not 6,000 but 6,600 here. And the units here, they will also produce here, and the market price will increase a little bit, because now it is this unit here setting the marginal price. What we also look here is that CO2 emissions, they have increased considerably. So the target we have here is not met. Our CO2 quota here was 580, but now we want to emit 1,088 tons. This is not possible here. So what will happen then is that we will now increase the CO2 quota price in order to fulfill the target we have. I'll show that how this will look like in the next slide. Now we have increased the CO2 quota price here, and we have nearly the same CO2 emissions as we had before we built this extra Power-to-X units. And you can see here what happens. The prices here of wind and biomass units, they are the same, but coal-fired units here, they have to buy CO2 quotas, so their marginal price has increased considerably. Now it is this unit here that will set the marginal price in the area, and you can see that this marginal price has increased. So now it is 135 euros per megawatt hour. The price is now at this very high level, so it is a good idea to build wind turbines and photovoltaic units. So the players in the market will start building wind turbines and photovoltaic units. In the Power Market Simulator, we now start building wind turbines. We start with building 200 megawatt of wind power. And you can see here we have built the wind turbines. This will, of course, reduce the CO2 emissions. So we will be below the quota, and the market will react in a way that they say, okay, now we want to reduce the CO2 quota price, and the reduction of the CO2 quota price will also reduce the market price, because the coal-fired units here, they do not need to buy CO2 quotas at such a high level as they did before. So the market price will now be this 87 euros per megawatt hour. But at this price here, it is still profitable to build wind turbines, so we will continue building wind turbines. In the Power Market Simulator, we will continue building wind turbines here, and we will also continue changing the CO2 quota prices. And at this level here, we have fulfilled the CO2 quota target we have here, and we have built this amount of wind turbines here, and the market price is now at a level here where it is not profitable to build more wind turbines. So we end up with this situation here where we have increased the demand with 600 megawatt due to the fact that we have these Power-to-X units, and we have also seen here that the market will ensure that there will be built more power in order to fulfill this extra demand. So the politicians, they need not decide on building more wind power and photovoltaic in an area where there is an increased demand due to Power-to-X units. The international power market will ensure that this extra capacity needed, production capacity needed, will be built. What happens here in this case where the demand would increase due to the fact that we have to use electricity on Power-to-X units? The electricity producers that were the owner of fossil fuel plants, they were happy because they had to produce more. So they went on the CO2 quota market to buy quotas for this extra production. This would increase the CO2 quota price because the demand would increase. The coal-fired units, they would then find out that with these very high quota prices, they were not any longer competitive compared to biomass plants. The forecast for this very high electricity prices now made the players start investing in additional wind power. The wind power would then displace production from fossil fuels, and they had to produce less. So they would sell some of their CO2 quotas, and the CO2 quota price would then decrease. With this decrease in CO2 quota prices, the coal-fired units, they would become competitive with the biomass plants, and they would produce instead of the biomass plants. At the end here, the wind turbines, they would take over production. There would be an investment in wind turbines, and they would in fact fulfill this extra demand of electricity. The number of use quotas equal to the CO2 emissions is always the same, completely independent of expansion with wind and solar. In most cases, the economy will probably dictate that these Power-to-X plants and the wind turbines and photovoltaic units, they will be placed close to each other. in order to save grid extension, because if they are placed at different places, you have to also extend the grid, and this is very expensive. I will now make a conclusion for all three cases here. If the electricity and CO2 quota market is allowed to optimize the expansion and operation of the electricity system with increased electricity consumption, wind turbines and solar cells will be built solely for economical reasons. It is not possible to reduce CO2 emissions from European electricity and district heating production by building wind turbines and solar cells. One way in which CO2 emissions can be reduced is by buying quotas and not using them, because it is the used quotas that will decide on this total CO2 emission. Another way is to reduce CO2 emissions more than national targets allows for in the areas where there is no quota sector. This is the end of this video, where I have shown you how to use the Power Market Simulator to make some showcases where you can see how the CO2 quota market and the power market will interact and how the market mechanisms they are functioning. I hope that this video will inspire you to make your own showcases.